Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, today is day one from the Combine. It actually gets started today here in Indy. We got plenty of news and notes to get to from Monday. Plus, we'll finish up with our pre-Combine breakdowns with NFL Network's Daniel Jeremiah. It's all coming up on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raider podcast, February 28th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won, and won, and won, and won, and won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raider podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen each and every day. Remember, you can find the Locked On Raider podcast free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Thanks to my man Ari. Does a great job each and every day making sure we're up on YouTube, looking good and even sounding good on YouTube. And as you can tell, if you are watching by YouTube, I'm in my Airbnb. Right, I'm here in Indianapolis, excited about the opportunity all week long to be here. We will do our first show from the Convention Center later on this morning, or later on this afternoon, I should say. But this morning, we'll be talking to head coach Josh McDaniels. That's at 7 a.m. Pacific time and 10 a.m. Eastern time. So depending on what time you're listening to it, it may be getting ready to happen, or it might have already happened. But of course, we'll have plenty of sights and sounds from that. Should get a lot of good feedback from head coach Josh McDaniels. GM Dave Ziegler will talk a little bit later on this week, either today or maybe even tomorrow. But we'll have plenty of that to bring to the podcast as well. But, man, it's going to be a lot of fun being here in Indianapolis for the next 4 days, as there's a lot of business that goes on here at the Combine. Plus, of course, all the NFL draft prospects that'll be on display at Lucas Oil Stadium. If they're doing drills, if they're throwing the ball, catching the ball, whatever it is, they're going to be going through the interview process, the medicals, everything goes on at the Combine. And we're here to bring you each and every step of the way. And I won't be leaving here until Saturday morning. I won't actually be here to see the quarterbacks throw, but I will definitely be checking it out on NFL Network as soon as I touch down in Las Vegas around 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning. But I'm here Monday through Friday and excited to see everything get started underway today. And my shows will be generated, including this podcast, from Radio Row inside the Convention Center. And that'll be, obviously, you'll see that first one coming up tomorrow. But got plenty of news and notes to get to, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. And the first piece of news that rolled out early Monday morning was the fact that the Bears are looking to move the number one overall pick. And I don't think that this should be a big surprise. This is something that we've kind of talked about, could be a reality at some point. But Adam Schefter tweeted out early Monday morning. I mean, early, kind of woke me up out of my sleep, and I didn't get a whole lot of sleep when I got into town. I got in around, I want to say 3 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning. And I think this tweet went off around, or my phone went off around 5 with this tweet from Adam Schefter saying, the Bears already have been approached by multiple teams about trading the draft's number one overall pick. Chicago is said to be leaning towards moving the pick, so the number one pick now looks like it is up for sale. And, of course, the Bears sitting there at the number one spot. They have Justin Fields. They could hold on to him and try to move down and collect a bunch of draft capital and try to build that team up, which would be very smart. So if you look at it, the Bears are in a unique spot, and this comes from Field Yates from ESPN. He said there's a credible case right now for several teams in the top 10 to consider a jump, large or small, up the board for a quarterback. The Texans at number 2, they want to ensure that they get Bryce Young. The Colts at number 4, whoever they want to get. Of course, the Raiders there at number 7. The Falcons at number 8 if they're not sold on Desmond Ridder. And then the Panthers at number 9. And we've talked about it multiple times. I've talked about it. A lot of people suggested trading up to go get Bryce Young. I would love that if they can go get Bryce Young, but I just think that it's way too much draft capital for the Raiders to give up to go get him. But, and I had this actual soundbite on the show on Monday, but Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network during his Combine breakdowns, he was actually talking to a guy from the Houston Texans that covers the Houston Texans and was saying, well, what if they move up to number 2? Or no, actually he was talking to a guy that covers the Bears, and he was saying, well, what if they trade back to number 2 or number 4 or even number 9? So here's Daniel Jeremiah. Again, you heard this on Monday's show, but just in case you didn't hear it, here's what it would take to trade up to that number 1 spot. This includes the Raiders, even though he doesn't mention the Raiders at 7, but he does go to the Panthers at number 9. Check it out.
Trade ups for quarterbacks. Usually when you look at the trade chart, it's about 120%, give or take, in terms of the trade chart value. You have to pay a premium if you're going to come up for a quarterback, which is, great news there for the Bears. So when you look at some of those previous trades, which, by the way, when you look at the names of the quarterbacks that teams have traded up for since 2011, it's Trey Lance, Sam Darnold, Mitchell Trubisky, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, and RG3. So, in other words, don't be so concerned if you're the Bears about trading off of a Hall of Famer and moving back. It hasn't been a great list over the last few years. But when you look at those points, here would be the 3 trades. If we're going to look at those teams as 2 the Texans, 4 the Colts, and 9 the Panthers, here would be how that would shake out on the trade chart. So if you're just going to go back to pick number 2, you're going to get the second pick, the 33rd pick in next year's 2. That would be the trade you'd have there with the Texans. If you go to 4, you would have you'd have to give up a 4th round pick this year, a 4th round pick in 2024, as well as the number 1 overall pick. You would get number 4 overall, number 35 overall, and a 1st round pick in 24 and a 2nd round pick in 24. And then if you want to go all the way to 9, you're going to get the 9th pick, you're going to get the number 39 pick, and you're going to get a 1st round in 24, and you're going to get a 1st round in 25. So when I look at all those hauls, and I understand you could be trading off of the opportunity to get one of the premier defensive players there at 2 or 4. If you're asking me what I would do, I would be hoping the Carolina Panthers want to pay that price, and I'll go to 9 and I'll take all those 1st round picks and let's go try and fill some of these needs. So those are the 3 teams I think that'll be in the mix, and those are the 3 options.
So there it is right there. Just a lot of draft capital, and I don't know if Bryce Young is worth it, right? I mean, that's a lot of draft capital. Like I said, I'm a big Bryce Young guy. I know he's not the biggest dude in the world, but I like what he brings to the table. I also like what C.J. Stroud brings to the table. I think those are the best 2 quarterbacks in the draft. And, of course, Hendon Hooker, he is a guy that intrigues me. But later on, even though he seems like he might end up being a 1st-round draft pick as well. Speaking of Bryce Young's size, you want to talk about something that's going to be scrutinized this whole week here at the Combine, and he let it be known that he's not going to throw at the Combine. He's going to wait till his pro day, which is fine. You've seen Bryce Young on film during games, so that's really all that matters. You know what he could do with the ball, but his size is going to be something that's going to be scrutinized. Alabama listed him at 6 foot, which no one believes, right? A scout actually had him listed at 5'10". That's according to ESPN's Todd McShay. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth until he actually gets there and gets measured and gets weighed and everything becomes official. Remember they did that with Kyler Murray too. It's like, well, how tall is he going to be? How heavy is he? How big are his hands, right? That always becomes a big subject here at the Combine. So that's going to be the biggest thing when it comes to Bryce Young. How big is he? What's his size? Because I'll tell you right now, I know they have him listed at like 192. I would find it hard to believe that he's 190 pounds, right? He doesn't look like he's 190 pounds, and he sure doesn't look like he's 6 foot tall. But, again, they will put the official weights, the official size to the test this week here at the Combine. So that's going to be something that is going to be, like I mentioned, heavily scrutinized and talked about until it becomes made official. Also on Monday, the Washington Commanders actually released quarterback Carson Wentz. It's not a big surprise, but releasing Carson Wentz saved the Commanders $26.1 million against their salary cap. And, boy, it just seems like yesterday when I was in Chicago preparing for that draft and Carson Wentz was going to go number 2 overall. What did it go? Jared Goff and then Carson Wentz 1 and 2. And now all of a sudden Carson Wentz has been not only on the Eagles, he's been on the Colts, he's been on the Washington Commanders, and now he's a free agent again. And, we had Vic Tafer on my radio show on Monday on Unnecessary Roughness, Raider Nation Radio 920, and he actually mentioned Carson Wentz as a veteran that the Raiders might look at. And all I told him was gross. And I had people tweet at me and say, hey, Carson Wentz is available. What do you think? And I kept saying gross. Like, why would you want Carson Wentz? He's an injury waiting to happen. He looks like he has no confidence. When he throws the ball, it looks like a shortstop at this point. But he said you get him at, dirt cheap. And it might be a guy that, the Raiders look at as they try to develop a young guy behind him. And I am not for that at all. Also, something that Vic Tafer said that was kind of intriguing was he feels like, and this is just his gut feeling, that the staff is looking at this year coming up as a potential mulligan year, which basically means and goes against everything I've said about the team has to find a way to win 9, 10, 11 games this year and be competitive in the AFC West. He's basically saying that he feels like that they're going to have the rope to be allow themselves to build up the team the way that they feel like is right. Mark Davis isn't going to sweat them for wins this year, which, again, to me, is a problem. I look at it and say, are you serious? Right? Like, hasn't it gone on long enough? And I get it. This is only the 2nd year of this staff, and it's not their fault because of the previous staff's fault or their mistakes. But at the same time, man, think about your fan base, right? Think about Allegiant Stadium when it looks like it's a away game for the home team, the silver and black, when it's all red like it was the last 2 weeks. Like, I don't know how much more I want to see of that, right? And I'm covering it professionally, but at the same time, man, I want to see the Raiders successful, and I think a lot of Raider Nation wants to see the team win. But just from Vic's point of view, and again, it's just his gut feeling. He could be absolutely wrong, but he's kind of looking at it as, a potential mulligan year for this new staff. So that's something that, not in those exact words, I want to ask Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler about. Like, how do they view this year? I would love to know the answer if they believe that they can win this year, if they're going to try to, make the team a competitive team. Because if they don't believe that they could win this year, they sure ain't going to make a move for Aaron Rodgers. They ain't going to make a move for Jalen Ramsey. They sure ain't going to make a move for Lamar Jackson, right? I mean, if they don't believe that they, could potentially be a really good team this year, they might just go and draft a rookie and let him sit behind Stidham for a minute, and then when they feel like he could take over, them do that. That's a real deal possibility. And, I respect Vic Tafur and his opinions, just like I respect Vinny Bonsignore and his opinions. Those guys are insiders for a reason. I'm not an insider, right? I don't break news. I just report news. So, when they start talking like how Vic was talking to me on my radio show, to me, that doesn't come from he just grabbed something out of the, his backside and threw it against the wall and hope it sticks. No, that's something that it came from someplace, right? Somebody has relayed something like that to him. So, again, a little bit concerning for me, but that's just me, and it's not about what I like. So there's that, just kind of something to hold on to. Final little nugget that I have for you here in segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, news and notes of the day, has to do about the former Raider quarterback, Derek Carr. And I say former, quarterback, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful or anything, but we all know that the Raiders have moved on. Derek's moved on. But as I mentioned, being here in Indy, there's more than just the draft prospects that are on display, but it's also a lot of business gets taken care of here at the Combine. Ian Rappaport of NFL Network, he actually talked about it on Monday night that Derek Carr is also headed to Indy for the Combine to meet with all of the teams across the league. Check it out.
Not just about the prospects, but about the veteran quarterback, specifically Derek Carr, the former Las Vegas Raiders starting quarterback. Met with a couple teams over the last couple weeks. I am told, while we are at Indy here and every team is in Indy, Derek Carr also headed to Indy. Sources say he is expected to meet with a handful of teams here in Indianapolis as he re-kickstarts his free agent process. I would expect him to sign somewhere. I know there are several interested teams before free agency begins, kind of giving him a leg up on everyone else. He's already met with the Saints, already met with the Jets. I know there's some real interest there, so that is expected to continue here in Indy. I know there's also been some discussion about his price tag. Here's what I'm told. This is about fit. I know price will come up. Derek Carr has not had any substantial discussions about price or value with any of these teams. It has been all about fit. That is the most important thing, and we will see, perhaps shortly, where he lands.
So there it is right there. That was what Ian Rappaport had to say. And so, hey, what smart decision by Derek Carr and his agents, right? To get out here, get in front of all the teams, meet and greet with them, and start talking about possibilities of him joining the team, depending on what Aaron Rodgers says today on the Pat McAfee show. And maybe he doesn't say anything, but I gut feeling tells me he will say something on the Pat McAfee show. I'm sure that the interest in Derek Carr is really going to get ramped up this week here at the Combine. I wouldn't be shocked at all to hear some kind of resolution to what's going on with DC and where he'll be playing in 2023. But, hey, the guy played for the Raiders for 9 years, so don't want to, act like he's nobody and not there. I'm trying to focus on the Raiders moving forward, but I also found that to be an interesting nugget. Thought I'd bring it to the table here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. That's all I got for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up in segment number 2 and segment number 3, we talked about the quarterback position when it came to Daniel Jeremiah and his breakdowns from his pre-combine conference call that he had on Friday. Now we're going to talk about defensive players, defensive positions, and also a little just other. We'll sprinkle in other in there as well. That'll come up in segment number 2 and segment number 3. Before I get to that, though, do want to tell you about Built Bar. I've been telling you about Built Bar for a very long time, and I'll tell you what, I could have used a Built Bar on my flight from Vegas to Indianapolis. It was very late on Sunday, and they gave me some like peanuts, and they gave me some kind of, I don't know, it was some small little brownie. I don't know what it was, but it was almost like a cookie, but it was all broken. So when I went to eat it, it was all basically crumbs. So I just said, thanks, but no thanks. Could have used a Built Bar. Great tasting Built Bar. They have so many different flavors to choose from. If you like marshmallows, they got the Built Bar Puffs. If you like the OG flavors, they got those. If you like granola bars, they have those as well. I could have used any of those on my flight from Vegas to Indy just because it was a long flight and I got a little bit hungry towards the end. But Alas, I didn't have any with me, but you can have some Built Bars with you if you want to check out the website today, built.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDON15. You can get your fill of a Built Bar Puff. That comes with marshmallows. They have the granola bars on there. They have many different flavors to choose from, many different styles to choose from. All you got to do is check them out today. If you're in the Vegas area, you can actually walk into your local Smith's. You can walk into a Sam's Club, and you can get you a box or two or three, whatever the case may be. They have them right there in store. So if you don't want to wait, have them delivered to the house, you can walk right into Smith's. If you're doing your grocery shopping, get you some Built Bars as well. Check them out today, built.com. Promo code LOCKEDON15 will save you 15% off your order when you go to checkout. Again, built.com, promo code LOCKEDON15. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to get into the defensive breakdowns from Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network. He had his pre-combine conference call on Friday. Lots of good stuff. On Monday's show, talked all things quarterbacks, but there's obviously a lot more positions on the team that need addressing for the Silver and Black than just the quarterback position, and defense is a major part of that. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We'll close things out today because, well, today is when the combine and all the activities really get started, and we'll get plenty of audio, plenty of sound, plenty of things coming out of this week's combine that we'll bring to the table. But I wanted to make sure to respect Daniel Jeremiah and his combine breakdowns because, again, it was a 2.5-hour call, lots of good stuff, and I want to bring as much of it to the table as possible. So off top, here's Daniel Jeremiah kind of comparing and contrasting the top edge rushers, where they're, being talked about in the league, who's the top guys being talked about in the league right now, and kind of how he would rank them based off those conversations. Here he is.
Yeah, for me, it would be Tyree Wilson, by a pretty significant margin. I think there's a lot of buzz around him around the league. I think the league has it with him and Anderson a lot closer than people might think. He's got just freakish wingspan and burst and the ability to kind of use those long levers to get home. I think he's a really talented rusher. I think he's a big time athlete. Unfortunately, don't think we're going to get to see him do anything at the combine coming off the injury that he's had. So probably have to wait till the pro day on that one. But for me, it would be him. Miles Murphy is a tricky one because it's all in there. He has it all in his body. He hasn't got it all figured out just yet. But between his combination of length and explosiveness, I think there's more there. I think he's going to develop more as a rusher. I don't think he has a great plan at this point in time. And then Van Ness is, I'm going to end up moving him up in my next update of my top 50. I think I have him at 22 right now. Again, I was curious when you're watching because he doesn't start. And I know a lot of people are sitting there going, how in the world are you going to take a guy in the top 10? He didn't start at Iowa. But I had a chance to do my homework on that, and look, that's just the way their program runs. They're going to run with the older upperclassmen, the leaders that have been in those spots. They're going to roll those guys out there with starters, even though everybody knows this was their best guy. But he's got big time explosiveness and power, kind of a bull in a china shop. Again, somebody who's just figuring out. But when you watched him against the best tackles he played against, he got after him. So I think that is closer to me. What I'm getting at is going to be Murphy, and Van Ness is pretty close. To me, I would have Tyree Wilson ahead of those two guys.
So there you go. That's a good little breakdown of the top edge rushers from Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network. And for my money, Will Anderson is the guy. My money, Will Anderson from Alabama is the absolute dude, right? I mean, he's a guy that has been there, done that, done it on a high level, won a lot of games, won a national championship. You know what they bring to the table at Alabama. And I know that Tyree Wilson is getting a lot of love lately, and really it's a lot of potential. People like what he did, obviously, at Texas Tech, but it's very rare that you see a Big 12 player getting so much love so high in the draft, because usually you don't talk about the Big 12 and talk about defensive players, but Tyree Wilson is getting mocked very high. He's getting a lot of love lately. So here's Daniel Jeremiah kind of explaining why.
Look, to me, the way I have them stacked, I think Jalen Carter's the best player in the draft from Georgia, and I think that Will Anderson's the second best player. But I know when talking to people around the league, and when I do mock drafts, you're trying to get, just a feel and, the potential outcomes there, and not just doing the same exact thing every single time. And I know that there's teams that have it really, really close, and some actually even prefer Tyree Wilson to Anderson just because of the size and the length and the attributes that he has there. But if you're asking me, I wouldn't be trading off of either of those two guys. I mean, we look at Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. I probably wouldn't want to get out if I were them, as desperate as they are for defensive linemen. And I think those are the two best guys. So kind of a two-parter there. What would I do? That was what I would do. I'd take one of those two guys. And then, but I do want to make sure that Tyree Wilson kind of gets in the mix. I remember doing a similar thing last year, trying to alert everybody that this Trayvon Walker from Georgia, like, hey, just know who he is and be aware and don't be surprised. So that's kind of the same thing I'm doing here, same formula.
So there you go. Again, for most people's money, Will Anderson is the guy. He's going to be off the board very early. We know that. There's going to be a run on quarterbacks. There's going to be a run on defensive linemen, both interior and edge rushers. Probably pretty early. You'll see a lot of that in the top 10. But, yeah, right there, Tyree Wilson, he's a guy that's getting a lot of love. And who knows what ends up happening when the end of April comes up. Maybe he gets drafted as high as a lot of people projected. Maybe he drops a little bit. If he does drop a little bit, Will Anderson will be gone off the board. If the Raiders don't see their quarterback that they like, maybe a guy like Tyree Wilson with his length, his speed, he's still got to develop a little bit, but for all the intangibles that a lot of people like, maybe the Raiders go in that direction and bookend him with Max Crosby. And then you also have Chandler Jones thrown into the mix because I do think he's going to be part of it for at least one more year. That could be a good problem to have for the Raiders, right? How to get all these edge rushers onto the field. They still need some interior work, but you can get some guys that have extra skill at getting to the quarterback. That's never a bad thing. So continuing on with some defensive breakdowns from Daniel Jeremiah and his pre-combine conference call. Of course, the combine gets started a little bit later on today here in Indianapolis. Excited about the opportunity. How about Clemson edge Brian Breezy? He's a guy that a lot of teams are high on, and then a lot of teams are like, yeah, not so much. So it's really weird how they're kind of split. Usually you see a consensus on all these players. Usually most talent evaluators like, yeah, that's what we see. That's what we like. Even potential is why, this guy's going to get drafted pretty high. But this is really, a lot of teams are split on him. So Daniel Jeremiah breaks down why teams are split on Clemson edge Brian Breezy.
Yeah, no, he's to me, he's a tough player to evaluate because you see flashes of it. You see some of the flashes of the quickness. I know he's obviously, he's battled the injuries. I think there's some stiffness there, and maybe that's, some of it is injury related. But he's not the most loose athlete. They move him around up and down the line of scrimmage, but I didn't see somebody that was really, really explosive and fluid and loose. Like, I thought he was kind of more of a tight athlete, who's got some power. But that's why I think you get into a little bit of a tough evaluation there. And I have talked to teams that really like him. And I've talked to teams that aren't nearly as high of and don't see him as a first-round player. So it'll be interesting to see when it's all said and done. I'm excited to see him move. That's one of the things about the combine, not to get on my soapbox here, but I know, there's people who have been out there and have said, oh, the combine doesn't have value and it's the underwear Olympics. This is a great example of a player that I haven't seen him move around in person. And I'm sure there's people in scouting departments and GMs and head coaches that has some questions there as well. And to get out there and to see him with your own eyes after he's had time to get healthy and train, somebody like that, to see those guys move in person, it does have value. So I'm looking forward to seeing him in Indy.
So again, I find that pretty interesting because, again, a lot of talent evaluators usually are pretty much on the same page when it comes to these guys. Now, they don't necessarily mean that they're going to get it, correct where they're drafted at, but they see the skill set and they all agree that either the skill set is high, it needs work, it's low. They usually are all on the same page. But with Brian, they're just a little bit split on him. And so it should make it interesting to see how this draft process goes. This week here at the Combine is probably a big week for him. The final soundbite I want you to hear for segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, then we'll jump into some more in segment number 3, is about Patriot-type guys. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean just defense. This could mean offensive linemen as well. And, the reason I bring this to the table is because we still don't know exactly what Dave Ziegler, the GM of the Raiders, is looking for in his players. We hear about the versatility. We hear about smart players. But what is a player that Dave Ziegler, can identify? A lot of times you could look across the league. I talked about this in great length on Monday's show on my radio show. You could identify what a Baltimore Raven looks like. You could identify what a Seattle Seahawk looks like. As of late, you haven't been able to tell what a Raider looks like just because, there's been so many different decision makers that are pulling the trigger on these different players, and there's nothing consensus. I think everyone on my radio show kept saying, well, Max Crosby looks like a Raider. Yeah, he does now because he made it. But when he was drafted in the 4th round, nobody said, oh, that looks like a Raider, because everyone thought he was a kid that needed to be developed because he was too skinny and, had a lot of work to do. Fact is he got on the field and had 10 sacks his first year, and he was phenomenal, and he's been great ever since. And now he's gotten to a second contract, and he's one of the leaders of the Raiders team. So, yeah, he looks like a Raider right now. But what does Dave Ziegler, what does he think a Raider looks like? So just want to talk about a few of the Patriot type guys that Daniel Jeremiah sees in this upcoming draft. Here's his comment on that.
Patriot type players. Well, I mean, Peter Skoronski, I'll just kind of go down through the list here. Witherspoon from Illinois, because they value, ball skills and instincts and awareness so much in the secondary. He definitely fits in that regard. I would give you Keon White as one because of the versatility up front. He's almost 6'5", 280 pounds, and he could be an edge setter, which they've always valued, the physicality to set the edge in the run game. Trying to find body types like Willie McGinnis going all the way back. It's hard to find guys that are that big and that strong that can still move. So he would be one I would say that kind of fit that profile, a real smart player as well. Let me give you another one here. Van Ness from Iowa. Obviously, you have the connection there with Kirk Ferentz and Belichick, so he's always going to be comfortable with Iowa players, and he's a big physical defensive lineman who can move inside, outside. So those are some guys I think that would be, good overall fits. And then if we want to go to the non-power 5 offensive lineman that they hit on last year with Cole Strange, why not go back and go with Mauk there, Cody Mauk from North Dakota State. Again, versatility, bunch of different positions, highly tough, highly intelligent, Patriot type guy.
So I find that pretty interesting. And the longer that Dave Ziegler is the GM of the Raiders and the longer he goes into this draft process, especially the more guys that he sees and identifies and drafts that are really good players, we can start to get an idea of exactly what they're looking for. But the things that we do know, the traits that we do know, versatility, intelligence, they look for guys even from small schools. They don't mind. I mean, just guys that can get it done, guys that can make plays, and that's what the Raiders need. They need playmakers, they need some versatility, and they need some intelligent football players. That's something that Dave Ziegler even talked about on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, is intelligent football players is something he's looking for on both sides of the ball. So that's all I got for you for segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up in segment number 3, we're going to continue with the Daniel Jeremiah defensive breakdowns when it comes to the combine, the pre-combine conference call, and we'll start out talking about the cornerback class. And then we'll even have an other when it comes to a running back, a very talented running back in this upcoming draft. We'll do that coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. So here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to close things out. We'll get back to calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line tomorrow. I do believe that we'll have time for that, but wanted to make sure I got in as many of these breakdowns as possible from Daniel Jeremiah's 2.5-hour long combine conference call that he had on Friday, or pre-combine conference call he had on Friday. I thought it was some really good stuff, so I want to be able to bring that to the table. We do this each and every year here on the podcast, and love to deep dive into the NFL draft. And man, I'm so pumped up. You have no idea how pumped up I am to be in Indianapolis and have the opportunity to cover the draft the way that we're going to be covering the draft and covering the combine. That really gets ramped up today. But let's go ahead and jump back into the conversation what Daniel Jeremiah was talking about on Friday. And how about the cornerback class? And we'll go back to what I was talking about with the Patriots. And this is really based off of where the Patriots are drafting, but they need corner help. And it seems like every year they're drafting corners, right? But Daniel Jeremiah was asked about the cornerback class as it pertains to the Patriots and where they draft. And this might give you an idea, again, of what the Raiders could be looking for in a cornerback, where the cornerback class is pretty deep in this year's draft. Check it out.
Yeah, it's a good corner group. I think it's a better corner group than the receiver group. This year, when I look at it, I've got 20 corners with like top 3 round grades, which is a big number. I think it's a really good group of corners. So if you're at 14, I've kind of talked about those big 3. For me, it's Witherspoon, Porter, and Gonzalez, whatever order you want to put them in. And then when you want to get out of that range, to me, let's see, when is their next pick? The next pick is at 46. So if you're looking at pick 46, I think, Ringo from Georgia's gone. Banks from Maryland's probably gone. You're looking at Tyreek Stevenson. You're looking at DJ Turner from Michigan. Jartavius Martin is a nickel from Illinois. He's a really good player. But that's probably like that type of a group. Riley Moss from Iowa, maybe a little bit after that. He's going to fly. He's going to run really, really well. Julius Brents from Kansas State. Those are just some of the names I would tick off there that I think are really good players. But, when I talk about those corners carrying top 3 round grades, I think those guys are all starters. Whether you want to say he's a number 2 corner, whatever, he's out on the field when the starting lineup rolls out there. I think there's 20 of those guys.
So there you go. Those are the cornerback class as it pertains to the Patriots, where they draft. And so, talking about the first round, second round, third round, and beyond, there could be some guys that they could be eyeing there. But how about just the corners in the draft, in particular, round 1? How do they compare to the guy that I was a big fan of last year? Remember, everything was Sauce Gardner. Obviously, he went on to have a hell of a rookie year for the Jets. Defensive Rookie of the Year, Tariq Woolen was another guy that I was high on. He went on to have a hell of a year for the Seattle Seahawks. But here's Daniel Jeremiah talking about the corners in the draft, and in particular in round 1, how they compare to my guy, Sauce Gardner.
Yeah, the cornerback group, as I mentioned, I think I got 20 guys with top 3-round grades. So I think it's a really good group. Now, I had a higher grade on Sauce Gardner than anybody in this draft class. I was a big Sauce Gardner fan, so I don't put anybody in his class in this one. I don't think there's a Patrick Surtain in this class. I would have probably the similar grade on Witherspoon, even though he's a totally different player. I'd have a similar grade on Witherspoon to the corner that went to Carolina. Now name's going to escape me. What was his name? Oh, JC Horn. Thank you. Appreciate that. But yeah, I'd have a similar grade there. So I don't think there's the top end guys like that. I love Witherspoon. But I wouldn't put him up there with Gardner or Patrick Surtain. And then, depth wise, I think there's a sweet spot, and I think you can look at different positions and find sweet spots. And again, I think I would love to have 3rd round picks and need corners, running backs, tight ends. I think there's just a really, really good group to choose from there. And I think this is a good group of guys in that area. Safety wise, I don't think it's a great group. I love the Penn State safety, but he's going to be probably towards the back end of my top 50, maybe 30s, early 40s, somewhere in there. And then, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got about 6 safeties that I think are going to be, I feel good about saying they're going to be starters at the next level. So I think the safety group's a little bit light compared to the corners.
So again, a very deep class when it comes to the corners, and so we talked about Jalen Ramsey, talked about him on Monday, about the Raiders potentially making a trade for him and $17 million against the salary cap, which isn't a ton of money for a top flight corner, but depending on what the Raiders view this season as, there's no reason to do that. If you can go find your own guy or multiple guys, they have a lot of draft capital right now. If they don't make any trades where they have to give up a bunch of draft capital, they have a lot of cracks at it in the upcoming NFL draft. They can go and get a corner in round 3, in round 4, and possibly in round 5, like a Tariq Woolen, and be happy. Look, Nate Hobbs came out of round 5, and I think that everyone believes that he's a really good corner. Now, he took a step back his second year in the league just because I think, in particular, because of injury, but I still think he's a good corner. I think he's very serviceable. As a matter of fact, he brings some toughness that the Raiders need. If he could come back and fully healthy in 2023, and of course, that's a big if. It's hard to get all of a sudden really healthy, but you could put a healthy Nate Hobbs into the mix. You go and draft a guy that you look at and you feel like, okay, that's a playmaker moving forward, especially a guy that could be a ball hawk. They need to come away with some corners that can create turnovers. They've got to find a way to get the ball back. They just have got to do that. They have not had enough of those guys. They do not create enough turnovers, and it's been many, many years since they've had a real deal guy that creates a bunch of turnovers. I mentioned it the other day on the podcast, like last week. Reggie Nelson was the last ball hawk that they had on the squad, and he came up with, 8 interceptions, I think, his final year with the silver and black at the safety position. And how frustrating was Reggie Nelson? He'd come up with a big play, you'd celebrate it, and then he'd give up a big play. But he did have a way of getting his hands on the ball, and he felt very comfortable getting his hands on the ball. So I really think that the Raiders need to concentrate on getting some guys that are accustomed to coming down with the ball, creating turnovers, coming up with interceptions, knocking the ball out like the old Woodson punch or the peanut punch, whatever you want to call it. But guys that are just playmakers that see ball, get ball, like Charles Woodson always says. They've got to start having guys that can do that. Finally, we'll shift this conversation from Daniel Jeremiah's defensive breakdowns, and we'll talk about Texas running back Bijan Robinson. He's a guy that we've had people call into the show and say, man, that dude is going to be a stud. And he is. He's one of the best players. He might end up being the best player in this upcoming draft, but he's a running back, and where is he going to be? Where is he going to be selected, right? That's the question. Who's going to grab him early? Anytime a running back gets selected early in the draft, the team always gets criticized. But this dude could definitely be a difference maker. He's top 5 talent, but where will he be drafted? Here's Daniel Jeremiah talking about talent versus where he'll be drafted.
If you asked around, and I've done this to a bunch of teams, the most consistently highly graded player in the draft, because even on some of them, there's some varying opinions. You'll get some people will say on the defensive side, oh, I'm a Will Anderson guy, or maybe I'm a Jalen Carter guy. Everybody says that Bijan Robinson is not only the best running back in this class, he's one of the 5 best players in this class. He's elite. And then you transition to, okay, where does he go? And then all of them say, I have no idea. I have no idea. Does he go into the 20s? There's people that say, there will not be people inside the league. And I know, and some people think, oh, the analytics, they'll kill him. If he were to go in the top 10, he would not get laughs around the league, because people know how good this guy is. So I just don't know where to put him. And you look at all the different needs that these teams have. And my philosophy on kind of the running backs is I don't mind taking a running back in the first round, as long as your team is ready to win right now. Because if you take into account the guy's got 4, 5, 6 years of, elite production, I don't mind getting him in the first round, because I get the extra year on the contract with, it's easy to control it. Then I've got a franchise tag number if I want, and that can kind of take me through all of his prime. But I don't want to waste carries on a crappy team. I want to have all of his carries over that 5-year period count and help us push towards, a championship. So to take a big time running back like that and your team stinks, you're going to waste his prime, and it's not going to do anything for you. So that's the conundrum there with Bijan Robinson. But he is, no doubt about it, to me, he's one of the premier players in the draft.
So good stuff right there on Bijan Robinson. Covered him, saw him a lot when I was there in Central Texas covering Baylor. Obviously saw UT multiple times a year, was able to see what Bijan Robinson was able to bring to the table. And I remember every Texas fan was so fired up about Bijan Robinson, because he was that stinking good. And please believe he is that guy. So whatever team gets him this year, they're getting a dude. But it's crazy to think that the running back position is so devalued that someone will get criticized for drafting a guy who very easily could be the best player, all-around player in this upcoming draft. But somebody will get criticized for taking him early. As a running back, you can't take him that early. It's just insane. That and the linebacker position has really been disrespected, in my opinion, where you always just feel like you can get a running back anytime and you can get a linebacker at any time. But I don't believe that for either one of those positions. Linebackers, you need a dude, and running back, it's nice to have a dude, right? Bijan Robinson out of UT, that is an absolute dude. And that's all I got for you on today's show here on the Locked On Raiders podcast on this Tuesday, February 28th. Tomorrow, going to be excited. We'll have plenty to bring to the table, including what Josh McDaniels has to say on the podium. Again, 10 a.m. Eastern time, 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll have plenty of sound from that, plus anybody that I get to talk to, from players that are going to be made available to other analysts across the league. Who knows what kind of walks of life are going to be here at the Combine, but I'm excited about it. It's the first time I've ever had an opportunity to be here, so it'll be a new experience, but it'll be a great experience. And of course, we'll have that experience here all together on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.